The sun hung low over the small town of Greenhill. A soft wind blew across the open yard where the annual police auction was taking place. Rows of old vehicles, used uniforms, and retired equipment were arranged neatly. Among them, a small pen stood at one corner. Inside it sat a German shepherd with sad eyes and a rough-looking coat. His name was Max, once a proud canine service dog. Max sat quietly, watching people pass by without even glancing at him. His ears were slightly bent, his fur had patches of gray, and his tail lay still. The handler standing beside the pen looked at the crowd and spoke loudly. Next on the list, a retired canine dog. Name is Max. He served for 5 years in the city police force. People whispered among themselves. Some said the dog looked too old, some said it was too risky to keep a police dog as a pet, and others simply ignored him. The handler tried to sound hopeful as he added, "He's trained, loyal, and brave. He just needs a home." The bidding started, but no one raised a hand. The first call went unanswered. The second call too. The crowd began to lose interest. The handler sighed, knowing this was often the fate of retired service dogs who were no longer needed. At the back of the crowd, a young man named Arif stood quietly. He was wearing a simple shirt and jeans, his hands in his pockets, and his eyes fixed on the dog. Arif was 23 years old, an ordinary man with a calm face and kind eyes. He had come to the auction hoping to buy an old motorbike, not a dog. But something about Max caught his heart. When he saw the dog sitting so quietly, not barking or begging for attention, something stirred inside him. He saw not an animal but a soul that had given everything and now had no one. The handler gave the final call. "Anyone for this brave dog? He deserves a chance." Arif raised his hand slowly. The handler looked surprised. "You, young man, would you like to place a bid?" "Yes," Arif said simply. "I'll take him." People turned to look. Some whispered that the boy must be foolish. Some laughed, saying it was a waste of money. But Arif didn't care. He walked forward, handed over the small amount asked, and signed the papers. When the handler opened the gate, Max did not move at first. He looked up with tired eyes, unsure of what was happening. Arif knelt down near him, speaking softly. "Hey, buddy, it's okay. You're coming with me now." For the first time that day, Max's tail moved slightly. He walked out slowly and stood beside Arif. The handler smiled faintly and said, "Take good care of him, son. He's been through a lot." Arif nodded. "I will." As they walked out of the yard together, the crowd returned to their business. To most people it was just a moment, but to Arif and Max it was the start of something new. On the way home, Arif stopped by a small store. He bought a simple leash, a water bowl, and some food. Max followed him quietly, not pulling the leash, not making a sound. Arif talked to him as they walked. "You must be a strong one, Max. You don't look bad, just tired. We'll fix that." When they reached home, Arif opened the small gate of his rented house. The yard was small but clean. There was an old mango tree in the corner and a small shed at the back. Arif guided Max to the porch and placed a bowl of water. Max sniffed it, then drank slowly. Arif smiled. "Good boy. You're safe here." Max looked around, his eyes cautious but curious. The sounds were different from the police station where he once lived. No sirens, no shouting officers, no barking partners. Just peace. Inside the house, Arif made a small bed using an old blanket near the door. Max lay down, resting his head between his paws. Arif sat beside him, gently patting his back. "You don't have to work anymore, Max. You can just be a dog now." Max closed his eyes, maybe for the first time without fear. Later that night, Arif made himself some food and shared a little with Max. The dog hesitated at first, but then took it gently. Arif laughed softly. "You're polite, huh?" As the days passed, Max started to adjust. He followed Arif everywhere. When Arif went to the nearby workshop where he worked as a mechanic, Max waited outside patiently. When children passed by, they would stop to look at the big dog. At first, they were afraid, but soon they realized Max was gentle. Arif began to notice small signs that Max still remembered his training. When someone knocked at the door, Max stood alert. When Arif dropped something, Max picked it up with his mouth and placed it beside him. It amazed Arif how disciplined he was. One evening, as Arif sat on the porch fixing a small part, an old man walking by stopped to talk. "That's a fine dog you have there," he said. Arif smiled. "Thank you, sir. He was a police dog. They were going to leave him behind, so I took him." The man nodded slowly. "You did a good thing, son. They may retire, but their hearts never forget service." Arif looked at Max lying near his feet, his eyes half closed, and he felt proud. That night, a soft rain began to fall. The sound of raindrops on the roof made the house feel calm. Max lay near Arif's bed, breathing peacefully. Arif whispered, "Good night, Max. You're home now." As the rain continued, something deep inside Max seemed to heal. For years he had lived under orders, training, and duty. But now, in this small house with this kind young man, he found something he never had before. He found peace. But unknown to both of them, life was about to test their bond in ways neither could imagine. Because sometimes fate has strange plans, and the brave are called once more to show what true loyalty means. Morning sunlight filled the small house as birds sang on the mango tree. Arif stretched and looked toward the door where Max was sleeping. The dog's ears moved slightly as he sensed movement. When Arif stood up, Max opened his eyes and wagged his tail. Arif smiled. "Good morning, buddy. Time for breakfast." He filled Max's bowl with food and placed it near the porch. Max ate quietly, his tail moving gently. Watching him, Arif felt a warm sense of peace. It had been only a few days since he brought Max home, but it already felt like they had known each other for years. After breakfast, Arif packed his small bag and prepared to go to the workshop. "I'll be back by evening," he said, patting Max on the head. Max stood near the gate, watching Arif walk away. At the workshop, Arif's friend Bilal noticed the leash hanging from his bag and asked, "You got a dog?" Arif smiled. "Yes, a retired police dog. His name is Max." Bilal raised his eyebrows. "From the auction? I heard no one wanted that dog." Arif nodded. "Yes. I did not plan to buy him, but something told me I should. He looked so lonely." Bilal shook his head with a small grin. "You always had a soft heart, my friend." Arif just smiled and returned to work. But all day his mind wandered to Max. He wondered if the dog was resting or walking around the yard. When he came home in the evening, Max greeted him at the gate, tail wagging, eyes shining. Arif laughed. "Looks like someone missed me." From that day, a new routine began. Every morning, Arif and Max went for a short walk around the quiet streets of Green Hill. The neighbors started noticing them. Some smiled, others waved. Children would stop and ask, "Can we pet him?" Arif would nod, and Max would stand still as the kids gently touched his fur. He was calm and patient, as if he understood that he was safe now. One afternoon, a young boy named Ayan, who lived nearby, came running to Arif's house. "Arif, bye. Can I play with Max?" Arif smiled. "Sure, but be gentle. He's strong but kind." Ayan threw a small ball and Max chased it quickly, bringing it back each time. The boy laughed loudly and even Arif could not stop smiling. Seeing Max play made him realize how much the dog had changed. The once silent, lonely canine was learning to enjoy life again. That night, Arif sat on the porch, thinking about how Max had begun to fill his life with meaning. Before Max came, his days were simple but empty. He worked, ate, slept, and repeated. But now, every morning felt brighter, every evening more peaceful. Max seemed to feel the same. He followed Arif everywhere, sat beside him when he worked, and guarded the house at night. One day, Arif noticed something special. He was fixing a car outside when an unknown man came near the open gate. Before Arif could notice, Max stood up and barked loudly, standing in front of Arif protectively. The man quickly raised his hands and said, "Sorry, I just wanted to ask for directions." Arif calmed Max and smiled politely at the man. When the man left, Arif patted Max. "Good boy. You still remember your duty, don't you? Max wagged his tail proudly. It was clear that his old training was still strong, but this time he was not protecting a team or a city. He was protecting his new home and his new friend. Weeks passed, and soon the whole neighborhood knew about Max. People began calling him the brave dog of Green Hill. Old men at the tea shop talked about how Arif had given a new life to a forgotten police dog. One evening, as Arif sat with Bilal after work, Bilal said, "You know, your dog has become famous around here. Everyone respects him." Arif laughed softly. "He deserves it. He gave years of service and all he got was rejection. I'm glad I could give him a home." Bilal nodded. "You did more than that. You gave him purpose again." That night, Arif returned home a bit late. The streets were quiet, and the moonlight made the road glow. When he reached the gate, Max ran toward him, tail wagging. Arif knelt and hugged him. "Sorry for being late, buddy." As they entered the house, Max suddenly stopped near the porch and looked around. His ears stood straight, and his eyes focused on something in the distance. Arif noticed and whispered, "What is it?" Max stood still for a few seconds, then relaxed again. Arif did not see anything unusual, so he thought maybe it was a stray cat. Still, he felt curious. The next morning, Arif saw fresh footprints near the gate. They were not dog prints, and they were too close to the fence. He frowned but said nothing. He did not want to worry himself over small things. However, that evening when he returned, he noticed the lock on his small shed was slightly loose. Inside the shed were his tools and a few things from work. Arif tightened the lock and thought someone might have tried to open it. Max sensed his unease and stood beside him, watching quietly. Arif looked at him and said, "Good thing you're here, buddy. I guess someone is curious about our place." That night, Max stayed near the gate, alert and ready. His sharp instincts had returned, and his eyes scanned every movement around the yard. Arif could tell Max was back in his protector mode, but he trusted him completely. The next 2 days were calm. Arif almost forgot about the footprints. He spent more time training Max, teaching him to respond to small commands again. Sit, stay, come. Max obeyed each one perfectly. On the third night, however, Max began to bark loudly. Arif woke up and ran outside. The gate was open halfway. A shadow moved near the shed. Arif grabbed a small flashlight and shouted, "Who's there?" The figure froze, then tried to run. But Max was faster. He dashed forward and barked fiercely, stopping the man in his tracks. The intruder stumbled, dropped something, and tried to escape through the side fence. Arif shouted again, and this time the neighbors woke up. Lights turned on in nearby houses. The man climbed the fence and disappeared into the darkness. Arif held Max by the collar and said, "Good boy, you did it." He looked at the ground and found a small bag the man had dropped. Inside were a screwdriver, a wire cutter, and some rope. It was clear someone had tried to break in. By morning, everyone in the area was talking about the incident. The neighbors came to thank Max and Arif. The local police arrived, and when they heard the story, one of the officers recognized Max. "Isn't this the same K9 from the city police?" Arif nodded. "Yes, he was retired. I bought him from the auction." The officer smiled and said, "He still has it in him. Once a protector, always a protector." Arif looked at Max proudly. The dog stood tall beside him, eyes alert but calm. The officer saluted him playfully. "Good work, hero." That evening, Arif sat with Max on the porch as the sun went down. He patted his head and said, "You're not just my dog, Max. You're my family." Max rested his head on Arif's knee, and for a long time they sat quietly together. But deep in his heart, Arif knew that this was just the beginning. The world had more tests waiting, and soon both man and dog would face something that would show the whole town the true meaning of courage and love. The sun rose slowly over Green Hill, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Arif stood in the small yard with a cup of tea in his hand while Max sat near the gate, his sharp eyes watching the street. The night of the break-in had changed many things. The neighbors now looked at Max not just as a pet, but as a hero. Everyone talked about how a retired police dog saved the neighborhood from a thief. Children came by every morning to see Max. They would bring small treats, and Max accepted them gently. Arif enjoyed seeing how the dog once unwanted was now loved by everyone around. Still, Arif never forgot the way Max had reacted that night. There was something powerful in his movements, something that showed his old instincts were still alive. Arif often wondered how many missions Max had done before he was retired. He could only imagine the bravery behind those calm eyes. A few days later, Arif was working in the yard when a police jeep stopped near the gate. Two officers stepped out. One of them was the same man who had come after the break-in. He smiled at Arif. "Good morning. We have some news about that thief. He was caught last night. He confessed to trying to break into a few houses around here." Arif nodded. "That is good news. Thank you for informing me." The officer looked at Max and said, "Your dog helped us more than you think. When the thief heard that a police dog chased him, he panicked and made a mistake that got him caught." Arif smiled proudly and looked down at Max. "He still has the spirit of a protector." The officer said, "If you ever think of training him again, we can help. Even retired dogs can do great work in community service." Arif thought for a moment and said, "Maybe I will. He likes to stay busy." After they left, Arif sat beside Max and said softly, "How about we train again, buddy? Just for fun." From that day, Arif began to train Max every evening. He set up small exercises in the yard. He taught him to fetch objects, to respond to hand signals, and to run short obstacle paths. Max seemed to love it. He moved with new energy, his tail high, his steps strong. One afternoon, while Arif was training Max near the park, a small crowd gathered to watch. A group of children clapped and cheered as Max followed every command perfectly. An old man said, "Look at that dog. Age cannot stop loyalty." Arif smiled and patted Max. "You're a star now." Time passed peacefully for a few weeks. Arif and Max's bond grew stronger. Wherever Arif went, Max followed. If Arif sat to eat, Max lay nearby. If Arif worked at the workshop, Max waited outside patiently. One weekend, Arif decided to visit his old friend Imran, who lived on the edge of town near the river. He took Max along. Imran welcomed them warmly. "Arif, you finally brought your famous dog." Max sniffed around the yard and wagged his tail. Imran had a large open space behind his house that led down to the riverbank. Arif and Imran sat under a tree talking while Max explored the area. As evening came, they decided to walk near the river. The air was cool, and the sound of water flowing was peaceful. But then from across the river, they heard shouting. A small crowd had gathered. Arif and Imran ran closer and saw that a boy had slipped and fallen into the water. The current was strong and the boy was struggling. Without a moment of thought, Max jumped into the river. Arif shouted his name, but Max was already swimming fast toward the boy. The people on the other side pointed in surprise as the big dog fought the current, moving closer to the drowning child. The boy's head went under for a moment, and everyone gasped. Then Max reached him, grabbed his shirt gently with his teeth, and began pulling him toward the shore. Arif ran along the bank shouting encouragement. "Come on, Max, you can do it." It was a hard struggle. The water was cold and deep, and Max had to use all his strength. Finally, after what felt like forever, he reached the shallow edge. Arif ran into the water and helped lift the boy out. The crowd cheered loudly. The boy was coughing but alive. His mother rushed forward crying and hugging him. Arif looked at Max, who stood in the water, dripping wet and breathing heavily. Arif knelt down and hugged him. "You did it, buddy. You saved him." The people around clapped and praised Max. Someone said, "This dog is a hero." Another said, "He should get an award." That evening, the story spread quickly. By the next day, everyone in Greenhill knew that Max had saved a child from the river. A local reporter came to Arif's house to write about it. The photo of Arif and Max appeared in the town newspaper with the headline, "Retired police dog saves child's life." Arif did not care about the fame, but he was proud of Max. The dog sat calmly beside him during the interview, as if he understood none of it mattered to him. He had simply done what his heart told him to do. After the story came out, the police department invited Arif and Max to an event at the station. The officers stood in line to welcome them. The chief handed Arif a small medal and said, "This is for Max, a true symbol of courage and loyalty." Arif placed the medal around Max's neck. The people in the hall clapped as Max looked up at Arif with calm eyes. That night, after returning home, Arif placed the medal on a small shelf near his bed. He looked at Max and said, "You see this? It's not just for bravery. It's for your heart." Max wagged his tail and lay down beside him. Days passed peacefully again, but something unexpected happened next. One afternoon, when Arif was at the workshop, a fire broke out in one of the nearby storage buildings. Thick smoke rose into the sky. People began shouting and running for help. Arif heard the noise and rushed outside. He saw the fire spreading fast. The owner of the storage building shouted, "My daughter is inside." She went to get something. Without hesitation, Arif and a few others ran toward the building, but the smoke was too thick. Just then, Max, who had followed Arif to the workshop that day, ran straight into the building before anyone could stop him. Arif shouted his name, but Max disappeared into the smoke. The men outside covered their faces and tried to break open another door. Moments later, they heard barking from inside. Max was calling. Then through the smoke, they saw him coming out, pulling the little girl by her sleeve. The crowd gasped. Arif rushed forward and helped both of them out. The girl coughed but was safe. Max stood beside her, covered in soot but alive. The people cheered again. The fire brigade arrived soon after and put out the flames. The girl's father hugged Max and Arif with tears in his eyes. "You saved my child. I can never repay this." Arif looked at Max and said softly, "He is the real hero." That evening, Arif cleaned Max gently with a wet towel. "You brave soul," he whispered. "You keep proving that love never retires." Max looked at him with soft eyes full of trust. He seemed tired but content. Later that night, as Arif sat by the window, he thought about how life had changed since that day at the auction. The dog everyone had rejected had become the pride of the town. Arif realized that sometimes what others throw away can turn out to be the most precious gift of all. He looked down at Max sleeping peacefully on the floor and whispered, "You were not just a K9. You were meant to be my friend." But fate was not done testing them yet. A storm was coming to Greenhill, one that would challenge everything they had built together and show how deep their bond truly was. The days after the fire were peaceful. The story of Max's bravery spread far beyond Greenhill. People from nearby towns came to see the dog who had saved a child and stopped a thief. Arif received letters of thanks and small gifts, but what mattered to him most was that Max was safe and happy. Arif had always been simple and humble. He continued his work at the small workshop, fixed vehicles, and returned home to spend his evenings with Max. The bond between man and dog grew stronger with each passing day. Max no longer looked like the tired old K9 from the auction. His fur had regained its shine, his eyes were bright, and his steps were strong again. The people of Greenhill called him the guardian of the town. Even the police visited sometimes to check on him. But fame never changed Arif or Max. They still lived a quiet and kind life. One morning, Arif was reading the newspaper when he noticed a small report. The weather department had warned that a strong storm was coming toward the region. It said heavy rain and strong winds could last for several days. Arif looked out at the clear sky and thought, maybe it will pass without much trouble. But by evening, dark clouds began to gather. The wind picked up speed, trees bent slightly, and the air turned cold. Arif secured the windows and checked the roof. Max followed him around, alert as always. "Looks like a big one, Max," Arif said. "We'll stay ready." The first night of the storm came with heavy rain. Water poured down the street and thunder rolled across the sky. Max lay near the door, his ears twitching at every sound. Arif stayed awake for hours listening to the wind. By morning, many roads were covered in water. The next day was worse. The river near Greenhill began to rise. People started moving their animals and valuables to safer places. Arif went out to help his neighbors. Max followed him, walking carefully through the wet ground. They helped an old couple tie down their roof and guided a few goats to higher ground. Rain kept falling. The power went out and the whole town was wrapped in darkness except for a few lanterns and candles. Arif and Max returned home soaked and tired. Arif made a small meal and shared it with Max. "We'll be fine, buddy. Just one more night." But nature had other plans. By midnight, the river overflowed. Water rushed through the lower streets, flooding homes. People began shouting for help. Arif woke up to the sound of chaos. He opened the door and saw water already entering the yard. He quickly lifted what he could to higher shelves. Max barked, sensing danger. Arif shouted over the sound of rain, Stay close, Max. They stepped outside. The road looked like a flowing stream. A few neighbors called out, asking for help. Arif waded through the water to help an elderly woman reach higher ground. Max stayed by his side, guiding the way. By dawn, half the town was underwater. The local rescue team tried to reach people, but many areas were cut off. Arif's small house stood on slightly higher land, so a few neighbors gathered there for shelter. Children, women, and old men filled the small space. Arif gave them dry clothes and food. Max moved among them, calm but watchful. His presence gave people courage. The children clung to him, and he allowed them to rest their hands on his back. He seemed to know they were scared and did everything to make them feel safe. Around noon, a man came running from the far end of the street shouting, "There are people trapped near the riverbank. The water is rising fast." Arif looked at Max. He knew what the dog would do before even saying it. "We have to go, buddy." The neighbors tried to stop him. "It's too dangerous. The current is strong." But Arif could not ignore those words. He tied a rope around his waist and grabbed a long stick. Max barked once, ready to move. Together, they ran through the rain toward the river. When they reached the bank, Arif saw two people stranded on a piece of higher ground. The water around them was deep and rough. They were shouting for help. Arif called out, "Hold on, we're coming." He tied the rope to a strong pole and began stepping into the water. Max swam ahead, fighting the current. The people on the other side saw the dog coming and began to cry in relief. Arif followed carefully, holding the rope. The current was cold and strong, but he kept moving. Max reached the stranded people first. He barked and tried to pull one of them toward the rope. Arif shouted, "Hold on to Max, he will guide you." The woman grabbed Max's collar while Arif pulled the rope. Slowly, they made it across. The second person, a young boy, followed, holding the rope tightly. Max swam beside him, nudging him forward each time the boy lost balance. After what felt like an hour, they finally reached the safe side. Everyone clapped and cheered despite the storm. Arif hugged Max, his voice shaking with emotion. "You did it again, my friend." They returned home soaked and exhausted. The neighbors praised them, saying, "You both saved lives today." Arif only smiled. He looked at Max resting quietly near the door, breathing heavily but still alert. As night fell, the storm continued to rage. Arif sat near the window, watching trees bend in the wind. He whispered, "You've saved more lives than anyone I know, Max." Around midnight, another shout came from outside. "Help, someone's trapped in the shed near the workshop." Arif jumped to his feet. Max stood instantly. Despite the exhaustion, both of them ran through the rain. The workshop was half flooded and the shed door was stuck. Inside, they heard faint cries. A man had been trapped under fallen wood. Arif tried to push the door open, but it was heavy. Max barked loudly and began biting at the wooden edge, pulling it apart bit by bit. Arif used a rod to lift the door while Max kept working beside him. After a few minutes of struggle, they managed to open it. Arif crawled inside, found the man, and helped him out. The man coughed and said, "You saved me. I thought I was gone." Arif shook his head. "Thank him. He never gives up." The man looked at Max and touched his head gratefully. By morning, the storm began to slow down. The sky was still gray, but the worst had passed. The town was damaged, but people were alive. Everyone said that if not for Arif and Max, more lives would have been lost. In the following days, people came to thank them. Volunteers arrived to clean the streets, and Max walked beside Arif, helping however he could. Children followed him everywhere, calling him their guardian. When everything settled, the mayor of Greenhill called a small ceremony in the town square. He stood on a small platform and said, "Today we honor bravery and kindness. We thank Arif for his courage and Max for his endless loyalty. This dog has reminded us all what true heart looks like." The crowd clapped loudly. Arif stood beside Max, holding his leash proudly. The mayor placed a new medal around Max's neck and handed Arif a certificate of honor. Arif looked down at Max and smiled. "You deserve all of this, my friend." Max wagged his tail gently, his eyes full of trust and calm. That evening, as the sun finally returned after days of darkness, Arif and Max sat under the mango tree again. The ground was wet, the air smelled of rain, and the world felt quiet. Arif said softly, "The storm is over now. You've protected everyone, Max. You can rest." Max rested his head on Arif's foot, breathing slowly. For the first time in days, peace filled their little home again. But neither of them knew that life still had one more turn waiting. A moment that would move not only the people of Greenhill, but everyone who would hear their story. The day of the award ceremony finally came. The whole town was talking about the brave young man and his loyal dog, who had helped the police catch dangerous criminals. The story of Rafi and Max had spread far and wide, and people were inspired by their friendship and courage. Banners were hung on the streets, and many people gathered outside the community hall to see the two heroes. Rafi woke up early that morning feeling both nervous and proud. He looked at Max, who was already wagging his tail, ready for the day ahead. Rafi gave Max a gentle pat and said, "Today is your big day, buddy." Max barked softly as if he understood every word. Rafi dressed neatly in a clean shirt and trousers, while Max wore a small medal around his neck that Rafi had made from a piece of silver metal. They walked together to the hall, where people clapped and cheered as they entered. Children smiled and pointed at Max, who walked proudly beside Rafi, his tail moving happily from side to side. Inside the hall, the mayor, police officers, and many townspeople were waiting. The mayor stood up and greeted Rafi warmly. "Young man," he said, "you and your dog have shown great courage and kindness. When no one wanted Max, you gave him a second chance. And because of your faith in him, our town is now safer." Rafi listened quietly, his heart full of emotion. He looked down at Max, who sat calmly beside him, his eyes shining with trust and loyalty. The mayor continued, "Today we honor both of you with the Bravery Medal and a Special Service Award." The crowd clapped loudly as the mayor pinned a shining medal on Rafi's chest and placed another one on Max's collar. Rafi smiled shyly and said, "Thank you, sir. But I just did what anyone with a good heart would do. Max is the real hero. He just needed someone to believe in him." His simple words touched everyone in the room. The people clapped again, louder this time, and many had tears in their eyes. After the ceremony, reporters and photographers surrounded them. They took pictures of Rafi hugging Max, both wearing their medals. Some people asked how he trained Max. Rafi explained that he had never used harsh methods. He said that Max learned because of patience, trust, and love. His words were simple, but they carried deep meaning. When they left the hall, the police chief stopped Rafi and said, "Rafi, the department would like to offer you a position as a junior dog trainer. We've seen your skill and your heart. You can help us train more dogs like Max." Rafi was surprised. His eyes widened and he looked at Max before replying, "Thank you, sir. It would be an honor." That evening, Rafi and Max went back home. The sunset painted the sky orange and gold, and everything looked peaceful. Rafi sat on the porch with Max resting beside him. He thought about how life had changed. Only a few months ago, he had bought a rejected canine dog from an auction because he saw something special in his eyes. People had laughed at him and said it was a mistake. But now that same dog was wearing a Medal of Honor. Rafi whispered, "You proved everyone wrong, Max." Max lifted his head and licked Rafi's hand, as if to say that it was all worth it. The bond between them had become unbreakable. They were no longer just a boy and his dog. They were partners, friends, and heroes in the eyes of many. Over the next few weeks, Rafi began his work at the police training center. He was given a small group of dogs to train. Some were stubborn, some were shy, and some had been abandoned by their previous trainers. But Rafi treated them all with patience and care. He believed that every dog, no matter how troubled, had goodness inside. Max often stayed by his side, watching and helping. When the new dogs saw Max obeying Rafi's commands, they followed his lead. Slowly, the dogs started to learn and behave better. The other trainers were amazed. They had never seen such results before. The police chief often came by and smiled proudly at Rafi's work. One afternoon, while Rafi was training a young dog that was afraid of loud noises, he noticed Max standing beside it, calm and steady. The frightened dog looked at Max and slowly relaxed. It was as if Max was telling the younger one that everything would be fine. Rafi smiled and said, "You're not just a hero, Max, you're a teacher too." Months passed and Rafi's reputation grew. People from nearby towns brought their dogs to him for training. He never charged high fees and often helped poor families for free. He said that he wanted to give back what Max had given him, hope. His small home turned into a place of learning and kindness. One day, the same officer who had once tried to sell Max at the auction visited Rafi. He looked ashamed and said, "I was wrong about him. I thought he was useless. But you proved that I was the one who failed to see his worth." Rafi smiled gently and replied, Sometimes we just need to look with our hearts, not just our eyes. The officer nodded, and from that day, he supported Rafi's training program fully. Years went by, and Rafi and Max became a legend in their town. People told their story to children, saying, "Never give up on someone just because others do." Max grew older, but his spirit remained strong. Rafi cared for him lovingly, making sure he was comfortable and happy. One peaceful evening, Rafi sat with Max by the lake where they used to train. The air was cool and the stars began to appear in the sky. Max rested his head on Rafi's lap, and Rafi whispered, "You changed my life, my friend." The dog's tail moved softly, and his eyes closed in peace. As time went on, Rafi continued his work, training more dogs and teaching others his methods. He often told new trainers, "And the best training tool is love. A heart that believes can heal even the most broken soul." The story of the rejected canine dog who became a hero remained alive in the hearts of many. Statues of Rafi and Max were placed in front of the police training center, reminding everyone that sometimes heroes are not born in glory but in quiet acts of faith and kindness. Every year, on the same day as the award ceremony, Rafi visited that statue and placed a flower beside it. He looked up at the sky and smiled, knowing that somewhere his loyal friend was watching over him. The memory of Max, the once rejected canine dog who had found love and purpose, continued to inspire generations to come. The young man who once walked home from an auction with a broken dog had given the world a lesson. That hope, faith and kindness can change everything, and that true friendship once found never really ends.